Good day, everyone. I am Thea Dominic Ang from the group Powerpuff Girls, and we will be presenting to you our research proposal entitled Impact of Sin Tax Law on the Cigarette Consumption Patterns of Youths in Selected Areas of Cebu City. Generally, our study revolves around sin taxes, or otherwise known as public health taxes, which are those that are targeting goods that can be detrimental to the health of the population. We are specifically tackling Republic Act 10351, which will be discussed further in the later parts of this presentation. It is of common knowledge that the chemicals from cigarette smoke damage the human body regardless of age. However, nearly all tobacco use begins during youth and then progresses during young adulthood. Usually, the youth starts smoking at an early age out of curiosity accompanied with the trait of being adventurous, and an earlier start makes it more difficult to quit. Compared with adults, they require only fewer cigarettes and lesser time to establish a nicotine addiction. Tobacco use is responsible for 6 million preventable deaths worldwide annually, and an additional 600,000 people are estimated to die from being exposed to secondhand smoke. It also asserts direct and indirect costs to the economy, including healthcare expenditure, productivity loss, absenteeism, and other socio-economic costs. The Philippines is one of 15 countries worldwide with a heavy burden of tobacco-related ill health. Annually, 87,600 Filipinos die from tobacco-related diseases. Hence, the country recognizes that tobacco control is not only a public health priority, but also a key development issue which affects overall quality of life and well-being. With that being said, a rise in cigarette tax and price is one way to go as a course of action. During the Aquino administration, the amendment of Republic Act 9334 led to the enactment of Republic Act 10351, also known as an act restructuring the excise tax on alcohol and tobacco products, which was effective on January 1, 2013. Conceptually, the excise tax on sin products is imposed for purposes of 1. Raising revenues, and 2. Discouraging the consumption thereof. Moreover, it held on to the argument that higher excise taxes on tobacco will result in preventing, reducing, and quitting. With the implementation of Republic Act 10351 in 2013, it is expedient to get a measure as to the effectiveness of this reform, aiming to modify smokers' behavior on cigarette consumption, most especially on the youth. It is important to study the effectiveness of the sin tax law in order to comprehend the effect of the strategy on consumer behavior. There are some related studies conducted in some parts of the Philippines, but to the knowledge of the researchers up to this day, no study was conducted in Cebu City. Moving on, this study aims to determine the impact of the sin tax law implementation on the consumption patterns of youth cigarette smokers in selected areas of Cebu City. Specifically, the study seeks the answers to the following questions. Number 1, what is the socio-demographic profile of the respondents in terms of their age, nationality, gender, and estimated monthly income or allowance? Number 2, what is the respondents' level of awareness on the imposition of sin tax law on cigarettes? Number 3, is there a relationship between the consumption patterns of youth cigarette smokers in Cebu City and the gradual increase of the sin tax rate? Number 4, is there a significant difference on the effects of the implementation of the sin tax law on the consumption patterns and decisions of youth cigarette smokers in Cebu City in the years 2019, 2020, and 2021?
As for the hypothesis of the SOP number 3 is that there is no relationship between the consumption patterns of youth cigarette smokers in Cebu City and the gradual increase of the sin tax rate. Meanwhile, in the SOP number 4 is that there is no significant difference on the effects of the implementation of the sin tax law on the consumption patterns and decisions of youth cigarette smokers in Cebu City in the years 2019, 2020, and 2021.
So we have concluded two frameworks. One is conceptual and one is theoretical. First is the theoretical framework. So the reform rationale for sin tax law was to improve public health through higher tax rates. Hence, the researchers intend to find out the impact of this control measure to the cigarette consumption patterns of youth in Cebu City. As such, we'll look into the different economic models that were developed to capture the impact of tobacco control, the myopic addiction model and the rational addiction model. Firstly, the myopic model argues that myopically addicted person's cigarette consumption is affected by the current price. Thus, under this model, an increase or decrease in price will decrease or increase consumption, and the effect of an increase in the price of cigarettes will be smaller than the effect of a price decrease. Secondly, we have rational addiction model, which supports the myopic addiction model. Under this model, the basic assumption is that individuals have stable preferences and can rationally weigh the satisfaction of current consumption or dissatisfaction of the withdrawal associated with smoking with the increase and decrease in price. Furthermore, this model suggests that older people will be less responsive to both increase and decrease in price, while younger individuals will be relatively more responsive to immediate changes in prices. So based on these models, the researchers theorized that in order to determine if there is indeed a relationship between the implementation of the sin tax law and the cigarette consumption patterns of youth in Cebu City, we have to consider the individual's ability to pay by looking into the relevant economic data, such as their monthly allowance and monthly family income that could explain the consumption patterns of an individual. So, by analyzing the sensitivity and responsiveness of the individuals to the gradual increase of the sin tax rate, we can already determine if there is a relationship between the implementation of the sin tax law and the cigarette consumption. Ultimately, after analyzing the data and information, we could decide whether to recommend increasing the tax rate on tobacco products as an effective control measure to discourage the youth from smoking cigarettes. Next, we have the conceptual framework. So since we intend to determine if there is a relationship between the implementation of the sin tax law and the cigarette consumption of the individual, that would leave us the independent variable, which is the implementation of the sin tax law. Also, since we have to consider the relevant economic data of smokers, we have our intervening variable, which are the age, the gender, monthly family income or salary, and the estimated monthly allowance, because again, we have theorized that the individual's ability to pay affect their consumption patterns. And lastly, we have the dependent variable, the consumption patterns of the individual.
Based on the statement illustrated on the screen, the group makes the following further assumptions. 1. The respondents will provide honest and truthful responses. 2. The respondents are knowledgeable about the fundamental principles of sin tax law. 3. The youths in selected areas of Cebu City purchase cigarettes. 4. The respondents have been smoking cigarettes in the years 2019, 2020, and 2021. 5. The expanse of significant impact is measured through statistical hypothesis tests, which supply p-values that are less than 5%. 6. The implementation of sin tax law modified the consumption patterns of the respondents.
We believe that the study would benefit the youth because these can help them to be better citizens by being informed about the existing tax law and to have better buying decisions. The study will benefit the parents by providing information on the extent of influence of cigarettes towards their children to come up with a decision whether to increase in taxes or not. The SPE-USU will benefit as well, since the results of the study can provide information needed, especially for the programs offered under SPE that are related to taxes or law. To the society, this will help the society perceive housing taxes affect the consumption patterns of the youth and to know whether it is favorable or not. This study will help the government to make better decisions in order to design more effective policy in the future. Lastly, to the future researchers, this study will serve as their basis and reference to find information for the future research studies. Please take the level of influence of sin tax law, PRA number 10351 on a consumption pattern of the youth aged 18 to 24 years old. The same product focus on study is cigarettes. We focus on 3 periods from 2019 up to 2021. The subject area of the study is Cebu City, and out of 80 barangays, 8 barangays are selected to take part in the study. The 8 barangays include Itos, Bakayan, Talamban, Pinayawan, Labangon, Camagayan, San Antonio, and Sampal too.
For purposes of this study, the following terms are defined in order to clarify the meaning they convey. Number 1, syntax law refers to Republic Act 10351. Number 2, cigarette, a slender roll of cut tobacco enclosed in paper. Number 3, youth, the period between childhood and adult age, but specifically ages 18 to 24 years old for this study. Number 4, tobacco, the leaves of cultivated tobacco prepared for use in smoking. And number 5, nicotine, the chief active principle of tobacco. Number 6, addiction, a need for a habit-forming substance, behavior, or activity having harmful effects. Number 7, adolescents, those belonging to the 10 to 19 years age group. Number 8, smoking, the action or habit of inhaling and exhaling the smoke of tobacco. Number 9, absenteeism, the practice of regularly staying away. And number 10, reform, the process of examining existing laws.
As presented earlier, Chapter 1 is about the problem, rationale, and its background. It consists of the statement of the problem, hypothesis, theoretical and conceptual framework, the statement of assumptions, significance of the study, scope and limitations of the study, and the definition of terms. Meanwhile, for Chapter 2, it discussed about the review of related literature, which includes the related legal basis, the related literature, related studies, and the justification of the proposed study. For Chapter 3, it mainly dealt with the research methodology, which consists of the research design, determination of sample size, sampling design and techniques, the subjects of the study, the research instrument, data gathering procedure, data processing method, and statistical treatment. The related legal basis of the proposed study is the syntax law. The government's commitment to protect the well-being of its citizens and to curb cigarette consumption and other vices was reinforced with the passage of Republic Act 10351, otherwise known as the Syntax Reform Law of 2012. As enacted by Revenue Regulation Number 17-2012, it modified the tax composition of sin products, especially on cigarettes. Its substantive features include but are not limited to the following. First, an increase in tax rates. Second, the conversion from a multi-tiered system to a unitary excise tax system. And third is an automatic 4% adjustment to the excise tax on certain sin products on an annual basis. Firstly, the increase in its tax rates pertains to the establishment of a minimum tax on all brands of cigarettes that is 4 times higher than that of 2012, which was only around 2.72 pesos per pack of 20. Secondly, as mentioned in a publication from NTRC Tax Research Journal, the Sin Tax Reform Law was able to eliminate the multiple-tiered tax structure for tobacco products, which covered different tax structures for low, medium, high, and premium priced cigarettes, and converted it into a 2-tiered tax structure separating the low and high priced cigarettes. Then later on implemented a unitary tax of 30 pesos per pack for all brands in 2017. And thirdly, through the reform, there has been an automatic adjustment of 4% on the excise tax on certain sin products such as liquors brewed, tobacco products, distilled spirits, and fermented liquors, other than those brewed effective on the 1st of January 2014, 2016, and 2018 respectively. The preceding related legal basis has a significant impact on the proposed study because it explained the main features of the tax reformation, and it is used as a basis in identifying the impact of sin tax law in terms of minimizing the sin products consumption from the year 2019, 2020, and 2021. The succeeding literatures have significant relevance on the proposed study, for it explains the background of sin tax and its evidence about how modification of the previous sin tax structure affected the behavioral consumption of the people. As shown in the independent review, Hofer in 2014 specified that sin taxes are taxes levied and designed to deter the purchase of commodities and involvement in activities that people perceive harmful, while also generating funds to assist in compensating society for the cost incurred because of such involvement. Common examples of commodities that are subject to sin taxes are alcohol, distilled spirits, cigarettes, and other tobacco products. The enforcement of sin tax has made a reflection of the notion that taxing a sin can give improvement in terms of consumption rather than imposing restriction of such commodities that will ultimately generate another unforeseen detrimental consequences. In the Philippines, the government was able to establish a variety of initiatives to minimize such tobacco usage. Yet, as mentioned by the World Health Organization in 2011, cigarettes were still considerably cheaper in the Philippines because of low tax and complicated tax system. In a journal written by Jusana in 2011, it depicted that low tax meant the final retail price and some measure of affordability of cigarettes are relatively equal to the affordability of other commodities. With that, monitoring the pricing strategy would be considered as a factor to substantially improve the taxation of sin products.
As for the related studies, given the negative health and economic consequences of tobacco consumption, a number of studies in both developed and developing economies have been conducted to determine the significant relationship between tobacco price increase and consumption. The following studies have looked into the effectiveness of raising tobacco taxes as part of a tobacco control strategy to reduce smoking, which has a significant bearing on the present study. A published foreign knowledge synthesis was conducted by Bader, Boisclair, and Ference entitled Effects of Tobacco Taxation and Pricing on Smoking Behavior in High-Risk Population, a knowledge synthesis, wherein the study shows that raising the price of cigarette is a very effective policy tool for reducing smoking participation and consumption among youth, young adults, and people with low socioeconomic status. Furthermore, a related issue has arisen regarding whether or not increased prices have an effect on reducing smoking initiation among adolescents. Another published foreign study by Charbord, Althaus, Lee, Figueredo, and Mulukutla entitled Impact of Cigarette Taxes on Smoking Prevalence from 2001 to 2015, a report using the Behavioral and Risk Factor Surveillance Survey, or also known as BRFSS, shows that in every $0.25 increase in state excise tax is associated with 0.6% decrease in population smoking prevalence over a 15-year period, with effects being particularly pronounced in young adults. As a result, tobacco excise taxes should continue to be a critical component of public health policy in the ongoing effort to eradicate tobacco use and thus improve population health. Studies with a significant bearing on the present study in the Philippines are unfortunately sparse. The most recent study is by the Preciados and Carcajente in 2017, which examines the microeconomic effects of the sin tax law in Mahatlag Leyte, Philippines, wherein the findings indicated that youth consume significantly fewer cigarettes following the implementation of this law. This indicates that the sin tax law deterred youth from smoking. In comparison, adult cigarette consumption remained stable, implying that a tax-induced price increase was relatively ineffective. As a result, it is recommended that specific policies must be implemented to discourage adult smokers from consuming additional cigarettes. The law and the studies mentioned has a significant bearing to the study since it has discussed the subject matter of the study and its related topics. The legal basis for the current study is the Republic Act No. 10351, or also known as the Sin Tax Reform Law of 2012. As it is a measure that uses tax reform with the goal of minimizing the negative consequences of the consumption of harmful commodities, particularly the tobacco products. The associated literature and studies are relevant to the current study because it compares the behavioral consumption of tobacco users before and after the implementation of the law. The aforementioned foreign and domestic research demonstrated a link between tobacco tax increase and consumption, wherein raising the price of cigarettes is a very effective policy tool for lowering smoking participation and consumption. In relation to the current study, the researchers will focus on behavioral consumption of youth between the years 2019, 2020, and 2021. Furthermore, the suggested study evaluates the cause and effect relationship on cigarette smokers' consumption in Cebu City between the years specified, which distinguishes it from the previous studies. To sum up, the legislation and studies will enable the researchers to analyze and evaluate the behavioral consumption and effectiveness of the latter in reducing tobacco users after its implementation between the years specified in selected areas in Cebu City.
First up is the research design. This study utilized a descriptive survey method. This method is used to assess the impact of the implementation of the Sin Tax Law on the consumption patterns of youth cigarette smokers in Cebu City. It aims to gather information on the social demographic profiles of the youth in terms of their age, nationality, gender, estimated monthly allowance, as well as determine their level of awareness about the Sin Tax Law imposition on cigarettes. Additionally, it is used to determine the relationship between the consumption patterns of the youth and the gradual increase in the sin tax rate, and the significant difference on the effects of the implementation of the Sin Tax Law on the consumption patterns of the youth through the years 2019, 2020, and 2021.
So now we move on to the determination of the sample size. The determination of the number of respondents will be done by using the sample size to estimate the average. However, the exact number of respondents will be concluded after conducting the pre-testing phase. Now we go to sampling design and techniques. The 97 respondents will be selected through a probability sampling technique called simple random sampling. The youth respondents will be selected at random from the different places in Cebu City and will then be asked to participate in the survey and answer questions about the impact of the implementation of Sin Tax Law on their pattern consumption in smoking cigarettes. Subjects of the study. The target population of the study are the youth in Cebu City, since according to the results of the Global Adults Tobacco Survey 2009, 28% or 17.3 million Filipinos aged 15 and older are current tobacco smokers. According to the World Health Organization, youth are classified as those whose age ranges from 18 to 24 years old.
The research instrument will be in the form of an electronic questionnaire, such as Google Form, and the items of the questionnaire will be categorized into 3 parts. Part 1 will determine the demographic profile of the respondents, such as their name, gender, age, nationality, civil status, occupational status, and their corresponding barangay, the choices of which are between the 8 selected barangays within Cebu City. And lastly, the respondents' estimated monthly income or allowance. Sensitive information such as the respondent's name will be optional. This will make it easier for the respondents to answer honestly. Part 2 will determine the respondent's history with smoking cigarettes, which will include questions regarding their preferred brand and number of sticks consumed per day that will establish the mean price point as well as their consumption patterns throughout 2019, 2020, and 2021. The third part will determine the respondents' level of knowledge regarding the sin tax law. The initial draft of the research instrument will be submitted to the research advisor for evaluation and approval. Corrections will be applied accordingly. To further validate its reliability, the group will conduct a retest twice on a small sample and measure its coefficient of correlation through the Spearman rank difference coefficient correlation. If the resulting value is high, the research instrument is reliable.
For the data gathering procedure, the researchers will prepare a letter of request signed by the researcher's advisor to allow them to conduct the study. The research instrument in the form of survey questionnaire is then constructed and submitted to the researcher's advisor for approval. Having found the research instrument valid and reliable, the researchers will proceed to distribute the questionnaires through Google Forms to the subjects of the study. The questionnaire will be administered in 2022 in 8 selected barangays within Cebu City. The gathering of the data will carry on for 3 weeks with an expectation that the retrieval of the questionnaires will not be less than 90%. For the data processing method, the researchers will collect and tally the data for interpretation. The data gathered will be analyzed, tabulated, and organized with the use of SPSS version 25. The researchers will make an assessment of the impact of the implementation of the sin tax law on the level of consumption patterns of the youth smokers as a whole, and as to age, nationality, gender, and estimated monthly allowance. The data will also be evaluated to find out the relationship, if there is any, between the consumption patterns of the youth and the gradual increase in the sin tax rate. The significant difference on the effects of the implementation of the law and on the consumption patterns during the years 2019, 2020, and 2021 will also be evaluated using SPSS. Along with the questionnaire that serves as primary data, the researchers will also make use of secondary resources in the form of published articles to support the results of the survey.
Response from the retrieved questionnaire will be encoded in Microsoft Excel using numeric values for ease. Then it will be imported to IBM SPSS for statistical analysis. To satisfy the first statement of the problem, the group will make use of frequency distribution. To measure the level of awareness of youths regarding the imposition of tax law, the researchers will use the weighted mean. To analyze the relationship between consumption patterns and the gradual increase in sin tax, the chi-square test will be used. Lastly, one-way ANOVA will be used to measure the variance in cigarette consumption between the years 2019, 2020, and 2021. All the statistical calculations in this study will be performed using IBM SPSS, and the statistical significance will be valued at the 0.05 level.